Imagine driving down a forgotten dirt road, far from cities, far from history books. The trees are thick, the air feels heavy, and then you see it. A massive rusted shape half buried in the ground. A military truck. Not just any truck. A World War II truck that should not be here. No signs, no markings. No explanation. You start asking yourself questions. Who drove this? Why was it abandoned? And how did it survive this long without anyone noticing? During World War II, battles were not only won with guns and tanks. They were won with supply lines, fuel, food, ammo, and trucks were the silent heroes that made everything move. Because of extreme terrain, weather, and desperation, engineers built some truly strange machines. Experimental designs, off-standard builds, vehicles that broke every rule. Many of them disappeared after the war, but some never moved again. And today they are still being found, forgotten, frozen in time. You are about to discover the strangest abandoned World War II trucks ever found. And trust me, the last ones on this list will completely change how you see wartime engineering. The first one looks normal at a glance, but its story is anything but. The Dodge WC62 6x6 was built between 1942 and 1945 in the United States. It was designed when the Allies realized regular trucks could not handle the brutal conditions of war. Mud, snow, bombed roads. The WC62 was made to keep going when everything else stopped. It had 6 wheels, all driven, giving it incredible traction. Under the hood was a simple but tough 6-cylinder engine built for low power, not speed. This truck was never meant to race. It was meant to climb, crawl, and survive. It could carry fully equipped soldiers or heavy cargo through terrain that would trap normal vehicles instantly. It served in North Africa, Italy, and during the Normandy landings. And then it vanished. Decades later, one WC62 was found deep in rural Belgium. Not on a battlefield. Not in a museum. It was sitting inside an old farm shed, covered in vines. Farming tools leaned against it. And here's the strange part. The farmer had built a greenhouse using the truck's frame, completely unaware that he was growing vegetables on top of a World War II military vehicle. A machine built for war, quietly supporting life. That alone is incredible. But the next truck traveled even farther before being forgotten. The Studebaker US6 was one of the most important trucks of the entire war. Built in the United States between 1941 and 1945, it rarely saw American soldiers. Instead, it was sent across the world through the Lend-Lease program to support Allied forces, especially the Soviet Union. This truck was built for endurance. Long distances, harsh climates, endless roads that barely existed. It had a powerful inline-6 engine and a strong 6x6 drivetrain that made it perfect for snow, mud, and ice. Over 150,000 of these trucks were sent east. Soviet soldiers relied on them for everything: food, fuel, weapons. After the war, many were absorbed into civilian life. They hauled logs. They carried grain. They became part of everyday survival. That's why one was discovered decades later in a barn near Irkutsk in Siberia, buried under wooden planks and forgotten tools. What made it chilling was the inside. Hand-carved Cyrillic letters scratched into the dashboard, likely carved by a soldier who spent months behind the wheel during wartime. You're not just looking at a truck. You're looking at the personal marks of someone who lived through history. And if that feels haunting, wait until you hear about the next one. The Mack nitrogen monoxide 7.5-ton 6x6 was not subtle. Built between 1940 and 1945, this truck was a monster. It was designed to haul massive artillery pieces that weighed more than most vehicles on the road today. Speed did not matter. Strength did. Under its long hood sat an enormous engine that produced deep, ground-shaking power. Everything about this truck looked oversized. The tires, the cab, the steel frame. Soldiers described it as unstoppable. It dragged cannons through mud, over destroyed roads, and straight into combat zones. After the war, many were scrapped. They were expensive to maintain, too heavy for civilian roads. But one refused to disappear. It was found decades later in a forest in southern Romania. To find it, enthusiasts followed old wartime supply maps. When they reached the location, only the top of the cab was visible. The rest was buried in mud. A tree had grown next to it, slowly bending one of the doors as it matured. That means this truck sat untouched for generations. Inside, original tools were still scattered across the floor. The speedometer still marked in miles per hour. It was like the driver had stepped out and never returned. A true time capsule. Now you might think that's as strange as it gets. But the next truck was so advanced that it stayed in production long after the war ended. The Tatra 111 6x6 was built in 1942 in occupied Czechoslovakia. Germany needed a truck that could survive extreme cold and terrible roads. Tatra delivered something unbelievable. A massive air-cooled V12 diesel engine. No radiator. No freezing coolant. This truck could operate where others failed completely. It had independent suspension, giving it incredible off-road ability. Snow, mud, rivers, nothing stopped it. After the war, this truck refused to disappear. Eastern European countries kept using it for decades. Forestry, mining, construction. One was found in an abandoned sawmill in Slovakia, buried under timber and old equipment. It had last been used in the 1970s as a generator. And here's the shocking part. When inspected, the engine still turned. After more than 40 years of sitting still. That's not just engineering. That's obsession with durability. And if you think engineers couldn't get any stranger, the next truck proves they absolutely could. Because it wasn't even built to look normal. It was built to do one thing. Tow tanks. The next truck looked like it came from another world. It was tall, awkward, and slow. And yet, without it, entire battles could have been lost. The Scammell Pioneer R100 was designed in Britain in the late 1930s, just before the world collapsed into war. This truck was never meant to be fast. It was built for one brutal job, recovery, when tanks broke down, when artillery got stuck, when nothing else could move heavy metal across broken ground, the Pioneer stepped in. It had a massive diesel engine tuned for torque, not speed. The gears were so low that the truck could crawl forward inch by inch, dragging enormous loads behind it. From a distance, it looked almost cartoonish. A forward set cab, exposed wheels, a long open chassis. But on the battlefield, it was priceless. It followed the front lines, often under fire, pulling disabled tanks out of danger. After the war, these trucks had no place in modern roads. Too big, too slow, too strange. One was eventually found in a stone barn in rural Scotland. It had been sitting there for decades, used as a support frame for wood and animal feed. Rusted chains hung from it. Tops covered its shape. What stunned collectors was one small detail. The original hand crank starter was still mounted in place. A rare piece that even museums struggle to find. A machine once trusted to rescue tanks, reduced to a forgotten skeleton in a barn. And yet still complete. Now things start getting truly strange. Because the next vehicle wasn't just a truck. It was half truck, half tank. The M3 half-track was introduced by the United States in 1941, and it changed everything. Engineers faced a huge problem. Trucks couldn't handle mud. Tanks were slow and expensive. The solution was a hybrid. Front wheels for steering. Rear tracks for traction. It looked odd, but it worked. This vehicle could carry soldiers, supplies, and weapons across terrain that swallowed normal trucks whole. It became one of the most widely used vehicles of the war. North Africa, Europe, the Pacific. It was everywhere. Some versions even carried heavy machine guns, turning transport vehicles into moving firepower. After the war, many were scrapped. Others were abandoned. One of the most haunting discoveries was made at an old airfield in Tunisia. The remains of an M3 sat half-buried near a collapsed hangar. Local shepherds had used the cab as shelter for years. The paint was faded, the metal eaten by sand and time. On the side, barely visible, were the words Bastogne Express, possibly marking its reassignment during the Battle of the Bulge, a vehicle that crossed continents, survived combat, and ended its life as shade in the desert. You start to realize these machines don't just disappear. They transform, but the next truck looked wrong from the moment you saw it. Almost like it was built backward. The Krupp was a German, light military truck developed in the late 1930s. It had 6 wheels but only rear-wheel drive. The engine sat low. The cab was recessed. The whole vehicle hugged the ground in a way that made it look unfinished. But that design was intentional. A low profile meant it was harder to spot from the air. It was used to transport troops and tow anti-tank guns during early German campaigns across Poland and France. It wasn't powerful, but it was reliable and easy to maintain. As the war dragged on, it was replaced by heavier vehicles and quietly disappeared. One resurfaced decades later near the German-Czech border. It was inside a partially collapsed stone barn. After the war, the owner had turned it into a makeshift workshop. The engine bay was open. A wooden plank was laid across the top, turning the truck into a workbench. Tools scattered around it. A military vehicle from the early days of Blitzkrieg, reduced to furniture. History has a strange sense of humor. And just when you think engineers had reached the limit of odd design choices, Germany pushed things even further. The SDKFZ-7 was a half-track, built to tow some of the heaviest artillery of the war. This wasn't a support vehicle. It was a centerpiece. It towed the infamous 88mm gun, a weapon feared by tanks and aircraft alike. The vehicle had wheels up front and tracks in the rear, giving it excellent control and traction. It carried troops. It hauled guns. Some versions even had weapons mounted directly on top. It was used on every major front. Tens of thousands were built. After the war, many were destroyed. But one took a different path. It was found on a rural farm in Hungary, modified, painted red, used as a logging tractor. The rear tracks were still there. Part of the towing assembly remained intact. Beneath layers of civilian paint, faint military markings were still visible. A machine once used to dominate battlefields, now pulling logs through forests. You can't make this stuff up. And now we reach a vehicle built not for speed or power, but survival. The Opel Maultier, meaning mule, was created for one reason. The Eastern Front, German trucks were failing in snow and mud. Roads vanished. Vehicles froze. Engineers took the Opel Blitz truck and replaced its rear wheels with tank-style tracks. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't fast. But it worked. The Maultier crawled through conditions that stopped everything else. Soldiers trusted it. Many were destroyed. Few survived. One was found in Ukraine inside an abandoned warehouse. Wooden beams rested on its frame. Tops covered its shape. The tracks were gone, but the suspension remained. Experts later discovered that early versions used parts from captured British tanks. Wartime improvisation at its purest. A vehicle built from desperation, found decades later holding up a farm shed. By now, you've seen trucks turned into greenhouses, shelters, workbenches, and tractors. But the final vehicle on this list doesn't just break design rules. It breaks reality itself. Because it wasn't just built for land. Asterisk, asterisk, by this point, you might think you've seen every strange idea wartime engineers could come up with. Trucks with tracks. Trucks built backward. Trucks turned into farm tools. But the next discoveries prove that World War II engineering had absolutely no limits. Because when survival is on the line, rules stop mattering. Only results do. One of the strangest forgotten machines wasn't meant to dominate the battlefield. It was meant to survive where nothing else could. Deep snow, endless mud, frozen roads. On the Eastern Front, these conditions destroyed vehicles faster than enemy fire. And that's where desperation created something bizarre. Germany needed trucks that could move when roads disappeared. The solution was crude but effective. Take a regular truck, cut it apart, replace the rear axle with tank tracks. That's how several hybrid field conversions were born. Many never made it into official production records. They were built in workshops, not factories. One such hybrid was discovered decades later in a remote forest clearing in Belarus. It sat tilted into the ground, almost swallowed by the earth. The front still had wheels. The rear used a crude track system welded by hand. No serial plates. No official markings. Just a machine that existed because someone needed supplies delivered at any cost. Rust covered everything. Trees grew through the frame. And yet the shape was unmistakable. A wartime solution that was never supposed to survive history. But it did. Then there were trucks that simply went where they were never meant to go. In the final years of the war, retreating armies abandoned vehicles in impossible locations, mountains, marshes, frozen lakes. One such discovery shocked historians. High in the Alps, a heavy military truck was found wedged into a narrow mountain pass. Records suggested a supply convoy attempted to cross the pass during a retreat. Snow closed in. Fuel ran out. The truck was left behind. Over decades, ice preserved parts of it. The tires cracked. The metal rusted slowly. Inside the cab, remnants of canvas and equipment were still visible. It wasn't destroyed. It was simply left. A silent marker of a decision made under pressure. These are the moments that remind you war isn't always about explosions. Sometimes it's about exhaustion. Another abandoned machine tells a quieter but equally disturbing story. In France, deep in a forest that reclaimed old supply routes, a military cargo truck was found sunk into soft ground. Only the roof and part of the cab were visible. When excavated, the rear bed was still loaded. Crates, fuel containers, equipment, everything was still there. The convoy likely came under threat. The driver may have fled, or been ordered to abandon it. What makes this discovery strange is that nothing was looted. Not during the war. Not after. The forest swallowed it whole. The truck didn't just disappear from history books. It disappeared from human memory. And then there are the trucks that changed. Hands. Captured. Reused. Repainted. One particularly odd discovery involved a World War II truck originally built for one army and later used by another. Found in Eastern Europe, the vehicle showed multiple layers of paint. German gray beneath Soviet green beneath civilian blue. Each layer marked a different chapter of its life. It had been used as a military transport, then a post-war work truck, then abandoned entirely. Inside the cab, symbols from different armies overlapped. A mechanical witness to shifting borders and broken alliances. You don't need words to understand that story. The metal tells it for you. Some abandoned trucks were found in places that made no sense at all. Desert regions, deep sand, no roads, no settlements. In North Africa, several military trucks were discovered far from any known battle sites. One theory suggests supply routes that never made it onto maps. Another suggests navigation failures during sandstorms. One truck was found with its hood open as if repairs were attempted. Tools lay scattered nearby. Whatever happened, it didn't end well. The desert preserved the scene like a photograph. Wind covered the tracks. Time erased the rest. But now we reach a category that stands apart from everything else. Trucks that weren't just strange. They were impossible, because they weren't built only for land. They were built for water too. Amphibious vehicles existed before World War II, but none were used at this scale. None were trusted with so much. And none were abandoned in places so surreal. After the war, many amphibious trucks were scrapped. But some were simply left behind. In rivers, on shores, in lakes. One of the most unsettling discoveries happened near a quiet body of water in Eastern Europe. Locals noticed a rusted shape beneath the surface during dry seasons. When water levels dropped, the truth emerged. An amphibious military truck sat half submerged, its hull eaten by algae. The wheels were still attached. The propeller still mounted at the rear. Older villagers claimed it had been there since the 1940s, used briefly after the war for transport. Then forgotten. During the 1960s, it was used as a fishing platform. Children climbed on it. No one thought about what it was. A machine designed to storm beaches, reduced to a quiet ruin beneath still water. As you stand back and look at all these machines, a pattern starts to emerge. These trucks weren't abandoned because they failed. They were abandoned because history moved on. New borders, new roads, new priorities. The war ended, but the machines stayed behind. Some were too big to move, some too strange to reuse, some simply forgotten. And now we reach the final discovery. The strangest truck of World War II, a machine that blurred the line between vehicle and vessel. A design so bold that even today it feels unreal. Asterisk, asterisk.